Dr. James Henry, welcome to the Radically Genuine podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So it's been about a decade. It was in 2015 that you came out as a transgender woman. And from what I understand, reading your Wikipedia page, you became the first known openly transgender active duty officer in the United States Armed Forces. And here you are 10 years later, sitting in front of me. There's been a federal indictment, and you have detransitioned back. It must feel like you have lived like multiple lives at this point.
Yeah. I mean, even before the transition in 2015, there's a lot of backstory to that. And I could have never imagined being in the studio today, sporting a beard, talking to you about a federal indictment, and having served our country for like over 20 years since I was an 18-year-old. So, yeah, it's pretty wild.
Well, let's go back. Let's reflect on the story and how you got to this point. So 2018, take us back to take us back to you being 18 years old, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. It was a different world back then. 2000, I was a sophomore in college, engaged to my high school sweetheart. I'd been dating for 4.5 years at that point, and really looking forward to adventure, seeing the world, being shown how to be a man, in the Army, and just learning how to be a doctor, treating people in harm's way. That was kind of my draw to the military. I didn't want to have debt. I wanted to learn how to take care of people in austere environments. So plot me down anywhere in the world, and I want to be able to treat people. My dad had done something similar in the 80s with a group called Samaritan's Purse. He was an orthopedic surgeon. It really inspired me to want to do something similar, faith-based or not. In my mind, faith is action. What is the fruit of that faith? And so the Army seemed like a great place to learn how to do what I was dreaming about, how to learn what to do what I was dreaming about. So, yeah, I mean, I was completely naive, and this was pre-9/11. So I graduated from airborne school the Friday before September 11th happened, and
Wow.
I was at Fort Benning, Georgia. I learned what an Army Ranger was, and watching these guys are at Ranger school, in formation, with their yellow reflective belts on their rucksacks, and I'm like, I want to be like that. These guys are badass, and 9/11 happened. Again, the week after I graduated from airborne school. I'm a 5-jump chump. I've never jumped out again since 2001. Would have loved to, especially the last 4 years at Fort Bragg. Just the opportunity never presented itself. And in 2001, everything seemed to crystallize for me as far as who I wanted to be, what I wanted to do. I was involved in a organization at Furman University in Greenville, South Carolina, called Reserved Officer Training Corps, or ROTC. I got a 3-year scholarship for my sophomore through senior years, and it afforded me housing. I got married, paid my tuition, and it set me up for a job, after I graduate, along with all the people that I spent most of my time with outside of class, all the other ROTC cadets. We all knew what we were going to do when we got out. When September 11th happened, everything got really serious. And our lead instructor was a retired first sergeant from the 75th Ranger Regiment, and he had been in the first Gulf War, and he was built like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Everyone remember this guy. First Sergeant Moore, he became a police officer after getting out of the Army, and this guy would make people cry. He would yell at you in your face, like the Full Metal Jacket experience. That is, I think, what he tried to create for us, and it was actually really worked. Again, I've never been in combat, but I've faced a lot of fears, and so that was the environment that I was trained in. We did this thing called Ranger Challenge. We were in South Carolina. We competed against other universities in North Carolina and South Carolina, including the Citadel. We crushed the Citadel, that year. We got invited to an international military competition at West Point called Sandhurst. and competed against lots of different countries, 30 different West Point teams, and then 4 other ROTC teams that got invited, from across the United States. I loved it. I mean, it was just, some of my happiest memories are doing the adventurous military training.
It seems like you were born to do this.
I loved it. It's like I came alive, in the woods with a pro mask and a rucksack and an M16 in my hands.
All right, I have to ask the question because I'm sure the audience is asking too. Regarding gender dysphoria, were you experiencing that at this time in your life or when you were younger?
Definitely younger.
Okay.
It's interesting how that all developed. I've spent a lot of time trying to understand it, trying to understand the from the research that is out there, and honestly, most of the research is really poor. Low numbers. It's not really randomized. It's really hard to do that. It's just people, I think, at least in my own experience, were clinging for hope. You want this to just go away. Your doubt in your own sex, your desire to be the other sex, or that you identify with the other sex, desperate for it to just the shame and the isolation that comes with that experience.
What ages would you say that you experienced it?
Earliest ages. I mean, my earliest memories are related to, probably like as a 5-year-old, wearing my cousin's clothes, having this great time with my other female cousin and my aunt, pretending that I'm a girl. And, my family had no idea that this was happening. And they came to pick me up. And my older girl cousin, probably 4 years older than me, heard about what happened that day and was like, that's disgusting. And in my mind, it's like, this was so much fun, imagining being a girl, being a mom. And then it was like this confusion. How can something that's so fun be so bad? And so then this shame kind of developed and this isolation. Like, I can't talk to anyone about this. In fact, we moved from my home in Pennsylvania when I was almost 6 to Florida, where I grew up, North Florida. And I met a girl named Jamie, I was like, I can't be called Jamie anymore. This is shameful. Like it was like.
Were you calling yourself Jamie?
Yeah, everyone called me Jamie my whole life up until that point. And then I asked everyone to not call me Jamie because I didn't want to be associated or whatever, with being feminine in any way.
Okay, so I just want to understand it from the perspective of a young boy.
Yeah.
And the data seems to demonstrate that gender dysphoria is a real condition, but it's actually, typically or traditionally been quite rare, transgenderism, and those who really experienced it had experienced it, predominantly boys, and experienced it from as early as they can remember, similar to your story. But one of the things that I really reflect on is the idea that you could be born in the wrong body, right?
Yep.
So it is an idea. So I'm more interested in the experience of somebody who is enjoying, feminine activities or traditionally feminine activities. And even at that young age, did you have this desire or wish that you were born a girl or you were a girl instead of a guy? Or was it more confusing than that?
I think it was confusing because it's more like there are off limits. Things are off limits, depending on what your sex is and culturally. And so if you gravitate towards these things that are off limits for your sex, then you must be in the wrong body. You must have been assigned the wrong sex at birth. Otherwise, why would you be gravitating towards those things?
So it makes it dichotomous. It's clear, like if you're a boy, you do these things. If you cross over and you enjoy the things that girls do, then then you're feminine, or maybe there's other pejorative terms.
So another story beside, I was probably 7, 8 years old. I loved ballet, and I remember watching videos of Mikhail Baryshnikov, on VHS with my sister, who's 11 years older than me, and just think, this is magical. I mean, this is like peak human performance. How can you be so physically athletic and beautiful at the same time? And And so I really enjoyed dancing. And I was dancing in our living room, and my sister's fiance said, "What are you, a faggot?"
Hmm.
Again, I'm like 7, 8 years old. I have no idea what this term even means, but I know I don't want to be one. You know, and so here is another sort of like something I love. It gives me so much joy, which it turns out dancing is way better than antidepressants in treating, you know, underlying depression. But I'm supposed to be shamed now for something that I love.
So
Again, as a 7, 8-year-old.
you're exposed to that right away, like doing something that feels natural to you.
Yeah.
Gets shamed based on gender roles.
Yeah. And then athletics. I didn't play baseball growing up. I didn't do football. I didn't do basketball. You know, in the United States, those are like the big three. If you don't do that, how can you call yourself male? I gravitated towards swimming and running. You know, I never did competitive dancing or anything like that. I would have loved it, I'm sure. But for me, running became my outlet, my dance. It became an art form. You know, I would watch East Africans run, you know, on the television. I'd be like, that's like ballet. And it's acceptable. It maybe not as acceptable as baseball, basketball, football, but it's acceptable. And I found talent in that. I found joy in it. And now all the science backs up why. You know, started running, my grades improved, you know, from a BC student to an AB student to all A student. You know, my self-concept was around, I'm a talented runner.
So as you got older and you went through adolescence, did this exacerbate any of that gender dysphoria, or did it diminish over time? How did that?
Oh, it got way worse.
Way worse.
Oh, yeah. I don't know what brought me to this, but I found a box of my older sister's clothes under the stairwell in our house in Florida, and I was like drawn to recreating this experience I think I had when I was 5. You know, and I took a lot of these clothes I lived on a farm, to a barn that was set up against woods, and I would dress in these clothes and go out in the woods by myself, just to kind of relive that experience. Or at night, I would wear these clothes in my bedroom. You know, I'm 10 years old, pre-puberty, and then I don't know why it gave me some sort of sense of relief or like, but it did, comfort, and an outlet from the world that was scary, you know, and I didn't understand. When puberty was coming on, you know, 6th grade, I remember praying to God, not with other people, to take my penis away. You know, and I remember in English class excusing myself to the bathroom because I thought, oh, God actually did it. He took my penis away. No, it's still there. I recall finding a book on my father's bookshelf. He's an orthopedic surgeon, but he had tons of books. And one of his textbooks from medical school, 1973, I mentioned this in a JAMA article that I wrote on human sexuality, finding the term transsexual for the first time. Again, this is pre-internet. And I'm like, wow, that's me. That's me. This is the narrative. And it had like this caveat that you will never have children and you will never have real social relations. You'll be an outcast. So I'm thinking, whoa. Not only did I feel the shame, you know, with the dancing and the dressing, you know, but if anyone knew that I had these issues, I'm afraid I will. It's like I won't be allowed in society anymore. You know? And then there's different movies that play on this. There were different TV shows that I saw with my older siblings, you know, Ricky Lake, Jerry Springer, you know, that just mock people who are experiencing gender in a different way, you know, or Ace Ventura that came out, you know, probably in 6th grade. And it's just sort of like, wow, I've got something really wrong with me that I can't let anyone know about. And then I was very religious growing up, reading the Bible on my own, all the way through on a Bible plan. I'm going to read the whole Bible. You know, we're talking 9, 10 years old. I'm reading the Bible. And I get to a part early on, you know, I think it's in Leviticus, people who wear clothes of the opposite sex are an abomination to God. All right. And I'm like, wow. So not only am I potentially an outcast to society, I'm an abomination to God, you know. And did I know what that word meant, you know, as a 9, 10-year-old? No, but it sounded bad. sounded real bad.
So this was something that you realized that has to be kept a secret. You had to keep it to yourself. If you spoke about it, you were at risk of being outcasts, being called names, and then you're also dealing with your own faith. You know, how does it make sense, like that God made you this way?
Yeah.
Yeah. And how do you think about that as maybe a young man, an adolescent, about why God may have put you through something like this?
So that terminology didn't exist back then. People being born gay or born, transgender, that came out later, I think, with the internet and everything else. So in my mind, it was just sort of like something that separated me from everyone else. I'm othered, essentially. And if I want to belong, I need to keep this under lock and key. And so that really, set up a lot of the narrative over the next 20 years.
Regarding your sexuality,
Yeah.
did you find yourself, as you went through puberty, did you find yourself being attracted to the same sex, or were you attracted to women, or both? How was that working for you?
I think it was both. I reflect on, most of my friends were male, but I remember, again, kind of around puberty, thinking I could marry my best friend if I was a woman, and man, wouldn't that be amazing? And so I would fantasize about this, being the wife of my best friend, and so again, it's hard to conceptualize all of that. And again, I think part of it, reflecting now, looking back on my religiosity and everything else, there's a term in the Christian New Testament calling the church the bride of Christ. And I'm like, how can I be male and be bride of Christ? I don't understand how this works. And so it's just very confusing, And now I don't feel comfortable talking to anyone about why I even have these questions to begin with.
Was there anyone you did talk to about it? Did you ever see a therapist, for example, or talk to anyone within clergy, or was it just something that you kept to yourself?
So Valentine's Day 2000, I'm 17. I've been dating this girl now for almost 4 years. And I disclosed to her kind of this narrative that I shared just now. And I don't really know how she took it, per se. We got engaged 5 months later, and then I had a confession with the priest. I was Episcopalian at that point, and I remember talking to the priest about it. And before, because I was like, is this going to prevent me from getting married to my girlfriend, or my fiance at that point? It's like, no, things will work out. Things will work out. And I think I truly had the belief that being married, being in the Army, they would somehow lead me out of this.
So was that part of your intention? I think you skipped your senior year, from what I understand, and then you had goals of doing all this, as you were mentioning earlier. Yep. Was it part of reclaiming your masculinity in some ways? Was you hoping that you would be relieved of this conflict you were experiencing?
Yeah, it was almost like I was putting this part of me, the feminine aspects of me, or the anima, in a box, and then all I had left was animus. And I couldn't let anyone see that part of me that was feminine, that loved to dance, all right? Loved to paint. I painted as a kid, and took art lessons in 8th grade, and that pretty much put that away because I didn't want to be perceived as gay. And yeah, I mean, it's almost like you're going in one direction to get away from some deep, terrible, dark aspect, so like fleeing from the darkness and running towards the light.
Like literally running away.
Literally running.
Yeah, and I mean, you really dove into running. I think you still run today, right?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's a way of kind of coping with what you were dealing with.
It was back then. Yeah. Absolutely.
All right. So, from what I understand, is you end up at Walter Reed, and you're actually treating combat casualties for like over a decade. Prior to that, or leading up to that, did you go through any episodes where you might have like really struggled with your mental health? And if so, like, can you tell us about that and how you resolved it?
Yeah. So everything was going great in my life up until 2008. And I had the dream job that I wanted. I married the girl that I wanted, and we were expecting our first son. And I was actually trying to train for an Olympic qualifying time in the marathon as a resident.
So you were that close to the time?
Yeah, the year. So as an intern, without any real training and coaching, and I'm sleeping, I'm doing these like 30-hour shifts, every third night, some months. I placed like 25th in the Marine Corps Marathon, beat half of the Army's team, my first marathon. And this was like on my off day. I did a 30-hour shift Friday morning till Saturday morning, and then ran the marathon Sunday, and then went back to work on Monday.
Impressive.
And it was like a dream of mine to run a marathon. I had set an age group record at a national championship race in Jacksonville, Florida, where I grew up, in a 15-kilometer distance, and I was 14. And my coach at the time was like, "You're going to be a really good marathoner someday, but wait till you're 25, or else it will hurt your bones or whatever." So I like had this decade-long sort of like stretch where I was like, "I'm going to run a marathon when I turn 25." Sure enough, that was my 25th birthday when I ran my first marathon. And it was mind-blowing to me that I ran as fast as I did. It was like 2:36, and which is about 5:58 per mile. And
that's my half marathon time.
And it was like with very little training.
Yeah.
It was more training over a decade versus I'm going to do a marathon, and I'm going to do these long runs on the weekend, and there's a schedule, and I've got a coach, and I'm telling everyone about my training. No, it was like I don't think people even knew I was going to do it. And I just, I saw some of the Army team the day before at the expo when I was getting my bib number, and it's like, "Hey, would it be okay if I run with you guys tomorrow?" "Yeah, sure." And the next thing I know, I'm running with them stride for stride, and beating one of them up the Iwo Jima Memorial. There's a climb at the very end, the last 0.2 miles of the marathon, past this guy who had beaten me at Fort Lewis like the year before in a shorter race. Felt good, and it was hard for me because I was already, it was hard for me after September 11th and how much I enjoyed Ranger Challenge and Sandhurst to do medicine, which I felt was my calling since junior high, and not do something like infantry, and I had to make a decision. Similarly, in the medical training, I was like, I have the talent, I think, to at least do an Olympic qualifier. But I have to also do my day job. I can't just run 100-mile weeks. I never was able to do that. I don't think I ever did more than 60 miles a week in a given week. So it was all that to say, I was hoping the following year to improve my time and to really train like 100-mile weeks.
And what year was this?
2008.
This is still 2008.
Yeah.
And up to this point, you haven't really had any mental health issues?
No, none at all.
Okay.
None at all. No. And so November 6, 2008, well, back up, August of 2008, I did a 22-mile long run. Didn't really build up to that distance. Like, I probably ran it too fast. And I got an injury, kind of repeat injury, iliotibial band friction syndrome. You get knee pain, and it takes some time to let it cool down and a little bit of stretching and all this stuff and rest. So I took up biking. I got most of my miles running to and from work. It was about 3 miles one way, and I'd wear a backpack, and I'd shower at work, and I'd do my shift, and I'd run home. And that's how I was able to stay in shape during medical training. When I had a bum knee, I got a bike, and I was biking to and from work. And when I was biking home, the time change had just happened, which I'm not a fan of time changes at all. The election, 2008 election, had just happened that Tuesday. This was Thursday. And for some weird reason, the street the bike route going home had been repaved while I was at work that day. And for some reason, they didn't mark off like 10 by 20 feet of pavement. And so there was like a drop off where they didn't put new pavement down. And, like on the highway, like beware motorcyclists. It wasn't a motorcycle, it was a regular road bike. But I hit it just right. Thank God I went to airborne school. I protected my head, fractured both my wrists and my pelvis. And I thought I dislocated my wrist. I tried to set it on the scene. These ladies came out of their house, said that it sounded like trash cans rolling down the street. I called my wife up to pick me up. She drove me to the emergency room at Walter Reed because I was only like 2 miles away. And they all focused on this wrist, and they didn't even think to look at other aspects of my body, that I had traumatized. It was just this wrist, which there's a nice scar from a plate, a few screws in that wrist. So when I got home and I took off my bike shorts, a lot of flesh came off with it from road rash. They had just given me narcotics, said, we'll schedule the surgery next week. Here's a bunch of narcotics. So over the weekend, I'm helping my wife prepare for a piano concert. She's a pianist, and I'm having pain in my wrist holding up a bench. I'm like, well, that's weird. And then I'm folding my legs like this. I'm having pain in my groin. I'm like, well, that's weird. This is on narcotics, right? And so the following week, I go back, and they're like, well, surely you didn't like break anything else, but we'll get a CAT scan of your wrist. We'll order MRI of your pelvis. It took 5 weeks to get an MRI of my pelvis at Walter Reed.
Why so long?
One of the machines was down, and the Naval Medical Center, I guess, had a backlog. So I actually went to Fort Meade, which is in Laurel, Maryland. It's about a half-hour drive from Walter Reed to get the MRI, and it took 5 weeks to get it, get on the schedule.
Is this typical for our servicemen and women?
I did not know at the time. Almost certainly yes. Yeah, and it really opened my eyes being a patient for the first time. Like, wow, there's a lot of waiting and uncertainty that happens. And so when I got a call from the radiologist, and he told me I'd broken my acetabulum, I was really angry because I quickly went to this place where I was like, I like work here. I know everyone here. I know how the system works. And this happened to me. What's happening to 17, 18-year-olds, coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan? Like, this is atrocious, and I was just given narcotics and just sent on my way, and it just made me so angry. And I went to the orthopedic department, and the front desk lady was like, no one's here. They're out of conference. I was like, that's bullshit. There's always an orthopedic surgeon on call at this hospital. I want you to call him. So while I'm waiting, I go and talk to my program director. He's like, hey, do you want to see the psychiatrist? You seem really upset. Do you want to see the psychiatrist? I deployed with this guy. He's an internal medicine doctor and a psychiatrist, and he's a ranger. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Wait, let me get this correct, right?
Yep.
So you have some justifiable anger.
Yep.
And they ask you if you want to see a psychiatrist.
Yeah, that's how that door got opened.
Okay. Take us from there.
So I wasn't exactly walked over to his office. And this is early December. I remember having an appointment with the psychologist for an intake, and then I saw the psychiatrist, and he's like, I probably saw him, 10 minutes, right? You see the psychologist for a half hour, an hour, to kind of get the whatever's going on, because the psychiatrist doesn't have time. They just prescribe, and so he prescribed me 100 milligrams of Zoloft. Never taken a psychotropic in my life.
For what reason?
I have no idea. But he wanted to ramp me up quickly. So I didn't read this on the bottle. I don't remember him telling me this. But he wanted me to start with 50s. He wanted me to split the pill.
Can I ask what you shared with him that led him to make that decision medically?
I don't recall. Other than that, I'm really angry about the medical care that I received. And I said, like, because if I'm treated this way, and I know everyone here, and I know how the system works, how the hell are people getting treated that are 17, 18 coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan? They're like, you're crazy.
Valid.
Here is an SSRI because you're clearly...
So sometimes they do more extended intakes. Did you open up about your struggle with gender dysphoria?
I did not. I was like locked down on that.
Okay.
And it was flaring during that period of time where I'm not working. I can't exercise. My wife is bathing me and wiping my butt because I have 2 broken wrists, and she's pregnant. and she
Ooh.
had to withdraw from her job, her dream job, being a piano professor. That semester, she withdrew to help care for me, and so I went from like a highly functional person to having a bad experience in healthcare to now being given just narcotics and SSRIs.
Yeah, unfortunately,
the PA the next day, the orthopedic PA, she was like, "Oh, that's great. The SSRI will replace the loss of exercise that you can't do."
that was what was said to you.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, unbelievable, huh? Unfortunately, that's certainly not just for our servicemen and women. That's like this has become standard care that an SSRI is given for almost anything, like blanket prescription for anyone who's experiencing emotions for the most part, right?
Yeah. So anger is scary, right? In a male especially, right? This person might become violent, So we need to check a box for the lawyers that we did something. That's how I see it. It's a cover your ass sort of. Well, these are tools we have in our toolbox. It's going to take too long to actually help this person, so I'm just going to cover my own ass, and here's a pill.
Okay, so you did choose to take it.
So I waited 2 days, and I talked to my mother-in-law and my priest. I did not talk to my dad about it, and I wish I had a better relationship with him because it would have prevented all of this. And my mother-in-law and my priest recommended me take it. My priest had done psychology training at a seminary in Boston. He didn't actually get licensed to be a psychologist, but he kind of saw himself as like a psychologist in priestly robes. It was disaster.
And it's kind of antithetical to the ideology of the Catholic Church, or
Anglican, Episcopalian. It was the worst advice that I've ever received in my life. Okay, and having waited 2 days and not actually remembering if he did tell me to split the pill in half, I didn't split the pill in half. I took 100 milligrams. All right, and so now I have insomnia. I'm tossing and turning in bed. I'm even more angry than I was before I took the pill. And I'm not going out doing drugs, speeding, spending money, any of the things that would be considered mania.
Yeah. But you're
I don't
in a
even
more
think
agitated state.
I'm more agitated than I was before I went to the psychiatrist over my
So
poor medical care.
they might describe that as hypomania.
I don't know what they described it as.
Yeah, that's how they're going to view it. Even though it's a drug-induced hypomania, they have been trained, or I should say they have been indoctrinated into belief that if you provide somebody an SSRI, they take the SSRI, they experience this agitated state, well, then there's an underlying bipolar disorder.
Correct. Even though it says in the DSM, you cannot diagnose this secondary to medication side effect.
And it's a very clear side effect of an SSRI. Right?
Especially at 100 milligrams.
Of course, yeah. So this just speaks to, I think, the ideology of modern day psychiatry, right? Everything is about this diagnosis of a severe mental illness, and they'll get you there. Even if you don't start there, they're going to find a way to get you there and then be under their treatment. So you get a drug-induced hypomania. What happens next?
So 48 hours later, my wife was actually emailing my program director, the guy who had referred me to the psychiatrist. Thank you so much for seeing James, and for offering him a referral to psychiatry and getting him so quickly. And as she's typing this email over her shoulder, I'm like, "Will you tell him that I'm stopping the medication? I don't feel well on it." And so she does, and she gets a phone call within 5 minutes of sending that email from the chief resident. So this is a guy who just finished internal medicine residency a year prior. And he asked my wife, "Where's the gun?" Because in the intake, they knew we had a 9mm Beretta. I didn't have any bullets in the house. It was under lock and key. But where's the gun? So now I'm like, wow, now they think I'm manic. Like, I know from that question that they think that I'm a danger, not that I'm having a bad side effect to this drug. So I see the psychiatrist within an hour of that email, alongside my wife for the first time. My wife outs me with the gender dysphoria to the psychiatrist in that appointment. It's like, And that just shocked me because I'm already dealing with. My first clinical rotation was on the inpatient psych ward at Walter Reed in 2005 for 6 weeks, and I know what the outcome is of people who have severe mental illness in the military. You get kicked out, you get medically retired, or you get kicked out, or whatever. And so now I'm like, I'm not even gonna get medically retired. I'm just gonna get separated for them knowing I struggle with my gender. So my wife's pregnant, 3 months pregnant. I don't have a medical license yet because I'm a resident, so you have to finish internship after medical school to apply for a license. I hadn't been approved yet. So I'm thinking everything I've just done the last 9 years of my life professionally is about to go up in flames.
So what a betrayal, I imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, there's betrayal on both ends. There's betrayal from the medical system that you're a part of.
Yep.
That you have sworn an oath to,
Yep.
right? The United States government and, a Hippocratic oath.
Yes.
And then you're facing with the system here, which fails to diagnose a legitimate physical condition, that delays your treatment. The righteous anger that comes from that and its impact on you over 5 weeks now gets misdiagnosed as like a depression. They provide you a drug. The drug, which is a high dose, and it wasn't the prescribed dose, but it's still a high dose. That
even
could
50 would have been
50
high
would have,
for someone who's never taken that drug before.
It doesn't even matter. It could be a lower dose. It can still induce these symptoms. So a known drug reaction induced by an SSRI then becomes mislabeled as mania and bipolar disorder, which necessitates another appointment. And now your wife, who's concerned, reveals that, hey, maybe there's more psychological problems that are underneath this, and they reveal this to the psychiatrist. She reveals it to it. All right, what happens next?
So my wife's birthday was the next day. Our anniversary was 3 days after that. And I'm like, I really don't want to be on the psych ward for her birthday and our anniversary. Like, I'm like begging the guy not to admit me to the psych ward.
Was that his decision? Like that's what he wanted to do?
That's what he was leaning towards doing.
With no actual evidence of imminent risk or danger to yourself or somebody else. Just having a hypomanic reaction to a drug.
Yep.
And then, of course, disclosing gender dysphoria.
Yeah, and honestly, like I don't think he really latched on to the gender dysphoria. I think it was more he's trying to clinically decide, is this person safe or not safe? Which kudos to him. Like that's really what doctors should be doing when they're determining an admission or not. Is this person safe or not safe? Given that he had never met my wife before, and I think he had some sort of trust in her that, she would keep me safe over the weekend. He prescribed me Abilify and Klonopin that day. I don't recall the dose.
So new drugs to the drug reaction.
Yeah. All right. Stop the Zoloft. Here's Abilify and Klonopin.
Just for the audience, can you let everyone know what Abilify is?
It's an antipsychotic.
Okay. Yeah. Antipsychotic.
Yep.
And what is Klonopin?
Yeah, benzodiazepine. Basically alcohol in a pill.
Yeah.
And so that was the agreement, that I would go home and start these meds and that I'd follow up on Monday, because this is Friday afternoon. And so I got home and I actually was able to sleep without taking any drugs. I napped from like probably 2 in the afternoon until dinner time, probably 6. I'm feeling better, actually. I was like, finally got some sleep. And then after dinner, I decided to take the Klonopin, and I slept for like 12 hours. And I think it was a 0.5 milligram dose. I don't recall the exact dose. And I'm like, I wake up Saturday morning, and I'm like, well, why would I take the Abilify? This makes no sense. Because I feel like I'm normal again. And so my mentor as an intern actually had just left Walter Reed to work for a pharmaceutical company, and he was an infectious disease doctor, and he lived in my neighborhood. So my wife and I are walking our dogs, and I knock on his door, and I say, hey, mind if I talk to you about this situation that I'm in? I really could appreciate your advice. And he invited me in, and my wife, and he's like, he was a retired Air Force colonel, and he was like, they tried to do the same thing to me. I had a rock climbing accident, and I hit my head, and he's got this scar, on his forehead. And they tried to put me in an antipsychotic when I was like really angry about the care that I got as an Air Force medical doctor. And I'm like, what? He's like, here, this is the deal. Don't take the Abilify because they're going to say you're feeling better because you're on this Abilify, and then see them on Monday. He's like, I'm like, and he's not in the system anymore, so he can give advice like that. There's no way in hell anyone who is being paid by the federal government, under their license would be able to give that sort of advice.
Yeah, I don't want to be too conspiratorial here, but this is the U.S. government. Obviously, they have a wealth of knowledge about what these drugs do. It almost feels like they're using it as a punitive measure for control when somebody is acting outside the boundaries and limitations that you're trained to. You don't question authority, right?
No.
I mean, you're trained that you follow rules.
Yep.
And if you act outside, like you become angry at your at the system or your government or anyone who is in authoritative position at you, then it does certainly seem like the diagnosis and the drugs can be used as a control mechanism.
Absolutely.
Okay. Did you feel that? Did you get an impression of that?
I did years later, but not in that moment.
Okay.
As I recall, it was more the fear of losing everything.
Yeah.
Being medically aborted, or if administratively separated, because I've had lifelong gender dysphoria that I've never disclosed to anybody.
Yeah, these diagnoses are a career killer. Like,
Absolutely.
You get labeled bipolar disorder, then you're mentally ill.
Yeah, and what's funny, that Friday when they wanted to admit me and then they didn't, there was a holiday party that night, and I was receiving an award, a teaching award that all the medical students and some of the faculty, I guess, were giving me. And I told my program director, look, I've been through a lot this week. I can't come to the holiday party. I'm sorry. And so I go from receiving an award to now we might just kick you out of the Army because you crashed a bike and we gave you narcotics and you're angry about it and we gave you SSRIs and you had a side effect that is 18% of people get insomnia on SSRIs, last time I checked. And yeah, we gave you a really high dose, and yeah, probably we didn't diagnose you correctly following our own DSM, but you need to be kicked out now.
Okay, take us from there.
So, I then had to really figure out how am I going to get out of this pickle, and I took like 2 weeks of leave in Florida visiting my in-laws. And I wrote a letter to my parents and my siblings saying, I don't want to see you this holiday. They were down in Florida as well, both sides. Because I need time and space to heal. I was blaming all my gender dysphoria on my family for most of my life. And I thought if I cut them out of my life, then I wouldn't have mental health problems with my gender anymore. That's completely false. Quite the opposite, actually. And so during those holidays, I was trying to figure out what to do, and we had an ultrasound on my wife, and we knew we were having a boy, and I was just so excited about being a dad. And I think that gave me something else to focus on. I was more than 6 weeks out from injury, so I could actually start doing some gentle exercise on my hip.
Are you taking any of the drugs they prescribe?
No.
Yeah.
I had such bad reactions to narcotics too. I mean, just nausea, constipation, high. I mean, I was miserable. It was worse than the injury.
Did you have follow-up appointments with the psychiatrist, and then how did they respond?
Oh, yeah. So the follow-up Monday, he was really angry at me. And I explained to him why. I got this advice, and honestly, I felt great Saturday morning. And I think he was really angry at me, and I remember walking out of his office
Because you didn't comply.
because I didn't comply, and I remember saying, you know what, I need to go take care of my pregnant wife, and I stepped up and left. He's a colonel. I said, this is what I said to him. Oh my gosh, I said, I know you're a lieutenant colonel and I'm a captain. I know you're an attending and I'm a resident, but if you were a civilian, I would sue you.
That's a bipolar reaction right there.
That's bipolar. Yep. Yep. Clearly.
I mean, I'm not being sarcastic either. I mean, this is like legitimately what we see in the community, that if you resist their ideas and their treatment, then it is more evidence of mental illness. Like now you're meeting the criteria.
Oh yeah. And then I'm like, wait, what criteria are you following? You have a manual. Use it. At least use a manual. I mean, not your just subjective projection of your own childhood wounds on me.
Yeah, and listen, the manual is subjective, so that's part of the problem.
It is, but at least it's something that we can all look at and be like, you either meet a diagnosis or you don't. At least do that, at a bare minimum.
Well, I mean, the problem
to have a common language.
Yeah, when you try to create the complexity of the human experience and put it in
reduce it to this. No, it's a disaster.
It allows itself for subjectivity.
Yep.
So normal and expected reactions can really get mislabeled through the lens of which they're trained. So let's just face it, like a caring, compassionate, scientifically minded, ethical psychiatrist or mental health professional would be excited or at least relieved or happy for you that you're starting to feel better. And the next step would be, let's just monitor this to make sure it was the sleep deprivation. And as a result of the drug, let me just follow up with you for a couple weeks and make sure your life's back in order. My goodness, you were used to running. It's a big part of your routine. Your lifestyle's been changed. You're struggling with how the medical system responded to you, right? Like that's compassionate care. But instead, there's an anger towards you because you didn't comply.
Yeah. And he ordered an MRI. This really pissed me off. Ordered an MRI of my brain, and I got that within like a week.
An MRI? Well, what's he going to find?
He found nothing.
From an MRI of your brain?
I have no idea. But they thought maybe because of my bicycle crash, even though I told them I didn't hit my head, I was wearing a helmet, well, we'll get an MRI anyway, tax dollars at work. Yeah. And they got it within a week. It took me 5 weeks to get one of my pelvis that I fractured, but it took a week to get one of my brain. It really made me even more angry.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is ridiculous. And so I recall coming back from my 2-week vacation down in Florida, and I was like, I don't believe this diagnosis at all. And I laid it out, they're like, well, fine, we'll have you see a psychologist and we're going to do neuropsych testing. Okay. So,
why neuropsych testing?
I guess to figure out if I have bipolar disorder or not. Because I'm like, I don't understand how you can diagnose me when it says clearly in your DSM that you can't diagnose someone's secondary medication side effect.
But also, how do you diagnose bipolar through neuropsych testing?
No idea.
I'm a psychologist.
I have no idea.
Never learned that.
I don't know. Not my lane, but I do the neuropsych testing. This is like early February, I think, at this point. My accident was early November. And I recall telling the psychologist, who's a trainee, okay. So he hasn't finished his psychology training. And I remember before I went to the appointment, getting a phone call and him saying, where are you? And I'm like, what do you mean where am I? I'm in the resident call room. He's like, you've got an appointment this morning. And I'm like, no one told me, and I'm like, so I go over there as quickly as I can. It's just a separate building from the main hospital. And already we're on a bad foot, because I don't even know that I had an appointment booked for me. No one told me. And I knew I was going to have neuropsych testing eventually, but I didn't know when it was beginning, okay? And I'm doing physical therapy. I'm doing occupational therapy for my wrist, and we just started off really poorly. And I remember one of my co-residents was like, make sure you get an attending psychologist, because if they're just doing a trainee on you, like, how are you going to get the right care? And I remember telling him, like, why am I seeing a psych intern and not an attending? And he's like, well, I'm overseen by an attending. And I'm like, I get it, but like I work here and like I'm a doctor and I don't know. I don't really appreciate being sort of like trained on.
Well, I mean, now you're starting to, present with signs of oppositional defiant disorder, maybe some ADHD.
Yeah.
Um,
They
ma-
did that test too.
maybe that
with the space bar.
maybe that irritability is, lingering signs of hypomania, so they can slap you on with bipolar 2.
I do think in the medical profession there's some narcissism. I mean, clearly. In my own, I've done all the MMPIs. Narcissistic trait came up 20 years ago when I did this neuropsych testing. I'd never done one before. And I think it's almost like it doesn't have to be that way. It does not have to be that way. But I had to go through this experience to learn that I'm not better than anyone else. I'm not worse than anyone else. That I'm deeply and securely loved, and no one can take that away from me, and to not seek the approval of others. But I wasn't there then in 2008, or 2009, February 2009.
And it seems like you're in a position of trying to protect yourself, right?
I totally
you're
am.
certainly in a defensive stance,
Absolutely.
right? Because
Yep.
it's valid. I mean, I think it's a valid reaction to kind of everything that you're going on. So it makes sense that you're, a little bit sensitive to anywhere where you could be misunderstood.
These are high stakes. I mean,
Very high stakes.
I don't have a license yet, and I loved being in the military up to that point. I saw it as like family, and my wife's pregnant, and I'm the breadwinner, and so it was very scary.
So what were the results of all these evaluations?
Yeah, adjustment disorder.
Okay, so it actually turned out in your favor.
Turned out in my favor, and they're like, just go back to work, so.
How are you and your wife at this time, given what she reported to the psychiatrist?
Yeah, our marriage was never the same. But even like a week and a half before that, not a week and a half, like a month before my accident on the bicycle, I had a lesion on the shaft of my penis. And I'm like, I haven't slept with anyone else. This is bizarre, and my wife is pregnant, and I asked her, and this was really poor form, but have you been with anybody? What I should have done is just gotten tested for STIs, seen a doctor, like not bring it up with her.
Did you end up doing that?
I did, yeah. And it was just a candidal infection, and it was likely caused by masturbation, to be honest, not anything to do with her other than not having enough sex in our marriage. But how can you do that when we're working? I was working a 30-hour shift every third night for a month.
Yeah, it's tough on a marriage.
And then a 30-hour shift every fifth night. And I'm treating combat casualties. It's not like normal bread and butter, heart failure stuff. It's like people my age getting blown up.
Yeah, so you made that accusation of your wife. I'm sure she didn't
It wasn't
handle
even
that
an
well.
accusation. It was more like, have you? It was a question, but it was obviously taken as an accusation.
Yeah, that's tough to hear.
And so our marriage was never the same after that, because I'm sure she had the same thoughts. Well,
of course, yeah.
How can I trust you?
Yeah.
So
there's a lot of breakdown in trust, starting with what feels like a betrayal when she reveals something very private to you, put your job at risk and your family at risk. And then something like this happens. It kind of everything's put in motion for the marriage to be broken down.
Yep.
And so, yeah, you're also talking about the lifestyle of being were you a surgeon?
Internal medicine.
Internal medicine.
Yep.
And the stress of having to work in those environments 30 hours, in what is that, like in a 3 day span of like 30-hour?
No. Like I would get to work at 6 a.m. and stay till noon the next day, awake. And, yeah.
Unbelievable.
And every third night.
Yeah, unbelievable.
They don't do that anymore. Apparently, they truncated it to 24 or 20 or something, or 18. I don't even.
So
know.
it's hard to
keep
be.
up with it.
It's hard to be emotionally stable when you are working those type of hours in sleep deprivation.
Yeah.
Under stressful conditions.
And this is what's funny, because I loved the ICU. Yeah, like the way that all the organ systems work together. Like it was just, I could do the math in my head really quickly. I helped people. I love the team environment with the nurses and teaching the medical students and the interns and residents. So I applied to fellowship to do pulmonary critical care, and I loved it. Not so much the pulmonary side of things, but the ICU side of things. I loved it and I was good at it. But towards the end of my first year of fellowship, things were starting to break down, I really needed a vacation, to be honest. I had 1 week of vacation. At one point I was wearing 3 pagers at a time, covering the ICU, the inpatient consults, and the outpatient consults. And they're shutting down the hospital, Walter Reed Army Medical Center in D.C., and transferring all of our care to Bethesda, Maryland at the Naval Medical Center, which is now Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. So this is all going on at the same time. People's emotions, I think, in the department were elevated. And I don't think it was just me, and we had to pick a research topic, and present it to the other fellows and the other attendings in the department, what we wanted to do research on. And I had come to this idea, I don't know how, probably on a run, that what if we could really help people with post-traumatic stress coming out of the ICU? And I, was thinking, we don't really ever talk to patients after they leave. I wonder if they had the opportunity to talk to someone who was in charge of their care after they're discharged about, why do I have the scar in my neck? Why do I have the scar in my wrist? What happened? How are things going to turn out, down the road, as opposed to being this helpless victim and powerless person on a ventilator, and sedated or with handcuffs on in an ICU bed. They can kind of take some ownership over their body, at least understand why that had to happen to save their life. And so my idea was a month out from their discharge that they would be able to talk to the person who was the attending on record about the care that they received. And we could randomize it. And, if they met a threshold of stress relating to their stay, they could see a psychologist or some other person could intervene so that it wouldn't become a chronic issue. It's going to be an adjustment disorder versus, post-traumatic stress disorder. And that could actually help set them up the rest of their life, so that they're not in this chronic state of hypervigilance. And I was mocked. I was mocked by the other fellows and attendings. This is how I received it.
How so?
No one else is interested in this idea. What are you thinking? Do you think we actually want to do that extra work after a month out, like spending another 15, 30 minutes with the patient? I'm thinking.
So what year is this?
This is 2011, April 2011.
So historically speaking, we're dealing with these elevated rates of PTSD with veterans who are returning from the Middle East. And we're struggling as a nation to be able to meet the needs of combat veterans.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but they were more interested in doing drug trials, for some of the sleep medicines, helping people use their sleep apnea machines. And it blew my mind that they're so interested in things that don't really matter, except maybe profit for a pharmaceutical industry, company.
Yeah, I was just going to ask what that meant to you as far as a culture in which you were working in.
The experience of having the idea to prevent PTSD onset and then being laughed at. I think I was at that point really confused, because I thought it was a really good idea. Kind of gets back to dressing up as a girl, as a 5-year-old, or loving to dance. Like, for me, I like to see where the physical and the spiritual meet, the metaphysics of it all, the meaning of it all.
Yeah.
So for me, it was like an ideal research project. I had another 2 years of fellowship. And in my mind, I'm the one doing the research. Why do I need an attending? I'm already a doctor at this point. I've already finished residency. I'm a board-certified internist. Why do I need an attending to approve my pulmonary critical care research project? So somehow, it probably upset me to the point where they could tell that I was upset. The same program director, who's a pulmonary critical care doctor, said, "Hey, why don't you see that psychiatrist again to make sure everything's okay?" This is 2 years after the fact. So I see the same psychiatrist. And he's like, "There's no way you're bipolar. This would have shown up with all that sleep deprivation, working 30-hour shifts and being a young parent, I think I just am burned out, to be honest. I've been in training, I don't know, my whole life. I've been in school.
And you're questioning a lot too, right?
Questioning
You're
a lot.
really kind of disillusioned at this point.
Mm-hmm. I'm disillusioned with the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's a separate issue. Osama bin Laden had been killed, and I'm thinking, why are we still here? Why am I still treating people getting blown up in Afghanistan? This makes no sense. I thought it was to, get them back for 9/11. Like, it was just confusing to me. And then even the election of Obama in 2008, I thought he was going to pull us out of Iraq and Afghanistan.
He ran on that.
Yeah. And so here we are in 2011. Osama bin Laden's been killed. And I'm like, what's going on? Why am I still treating people blowing up, missing 4 limbs, but they're still alive?
And I don't think we talk enough about the psychological impact on medical providers who are facing that and how it interfaces with like foreign policy decisions.
Yeah.
So there you are, you're actually struggling with U.S. foreign policy, obviously, clearly, because we're still in the Middle East. You're still facing the carnage of that and the psychological effects.
On top of that, they're shutting down Walter Reed, a 100-year-old hospital with all of its traditions that I knew inside and out because I did all my medical training there, to put us in a different hospital in Bethesda. And it was just like, to save money, which they didn't save a penny, right? Bracking Walter Reed. It was mind-blowing.
But you're also interested in how to advance your research, is to be able to devote yourself to a research project that could potentially serve veterans. And also it would have done like a lot, I think, for your mental health, your well-being, and
Absolutely.
your motivation to serve.
Yeah. It would have given me meaning and purpose, and instead of feeling like, what are we doing?
Yeah, I want to get, just take your temperature then at that time in your life about what it's like to be you, given what you've been through at that point.
I was done. I was so burned out. And so I went on a 2-week vacation that I'd earned. Okay. And I remember going on a 20-mile hike that I used to do long runs, training for marathons, and camping along the hiking route. And I came back and I just felt like a new person, spending some time in nature, like just kind of reliving old paths that I really enjoyed, on those marathon runs. And we were finding a pre-K for my son, a Montessori school. And I don't know, I felt like I was ready to get back into it, just having a 2-week hiatus that I had earned. It wasn't like extra vacation. And I came back and I worked in the ICU for 2 weeks. Okay, after that 2-week vacation, they let me work in the ICU, and they're thinking you're bipolar. It made no sense to me. And then I see the psychiatrist in a follow-up while I'm working in the ICU. It's just bizarre. And he's like, I think you do have bipolar disorder because I talked to the other attendings, and your presentations have been disorganized, and you're just not keeping up with your work. And I'm thinking, yeah, fine. Like, at this point, I'm board certified in internal medicine. I have a license, and I have my son, and I'm like,
so what evidence is this based on that he could subjectively say, I think you may have bipolar disorder?
None.
Some challenges with completing work, some disorganization.
Yes. Yep.
Could it be more than that?
I presented a patient that had been discharged to an attending, and I had not actually physically seen the patient yet. I tell you, I was wearing 3 pagers, and I knew I had the paper chart on this patient. I knew the attending had already seen this patient before. And so we're looking at the films. I remember we usually start just looking at x-rays and CAT scans, before we actually even talk about the patient. We just look at their films, to figure out what's going on. And he's like, have you even seen this patient yet? I'm like, no, honestly, I haven't. There was a patient who was needing to be get a bronchoscopy, looking in their lungs in the ICU under anesthesia versus in our bronchoscopy suite on the outpatient side. It was just, there was too much going on. I was like, I just haven't, And there's some disorganization when you're presenting a patient that you haven't actually seen yet.
Yeah.
But I didn't know how to handle the stress of that situation. Why am I wearing 3 pagers, and coordinating anesthesia? I didn't know how to ask for help. Like, part of being a respected doctor is that you don't need help. Everyone comes to you for help. Once you say you need help, you lose a lot of respect.
And that's really conditioned in medical school, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And in the Army.
Of course, the Army.
You know, but this was like both of those things together. So I know that attending had a big say in rehashing the diagnosis that I'd already done neuropsych testing on in 2009. I ran a marathon in November in Philly as a fellow. Like I thought, as a fellow, this is how they got me into this fellowship. I thought I would have more time to run, to be honest, and more time with my son. That'd be different than residency. It'd be better than residency. Time to do research, time to read, all this stuff. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to get that Olympic qualifier, And so I ran the Philly Marathon in 2010 in 2:33. Okay, so I don't know, 5:50 per mile. And it was my second marathon from the one that I had done as an intern, because I had recovered from my bicycle crash at this point. So my bicycle crash had been 2 years before. So this is my second marathon, and I dropped my time a couple minutes, and then I actually got a free pass or whatever to run the national marathon in DC in March. So I didn't have to pay to enter. I got to start at the front. I had like a seated spot and all this stuff, and I'm thinking I can win this thing. My training was pretty good over the winter, but I only ran 2:35. I hit a wall at mile 18. I was just running too fast, and I just felt miserable the last 8 miles. Most people hit the wall at like 22. I hit it at 18 miles. It was just a miserable run. And you said you run a half marathon at that time. The way they devised the finish line is the marathoners and half marathoners were finishing in the same place. And I'm literally finishing at the same time as the half marathoners. And I can't get to the end of the chute just to like sit down. Oh, I was just miserable. And anyway, they're like, you're running too much, so you're clearly manic.
That was their assessment?
Yeah. Yep. You're running too much. And I'm like, I'm running no more than I did as an intern, no more than I did as a medical student. It's my same sort of routine. Like they couldn't conceptualize that I had been training for that marathon for 10 years. And then once you're in a certain shape, you can maintain it with less sort of like stress on the body. Like there's a way to maintain fitness. Mind you, I was really trying to get into this program that the Army had. If you've run an Olympic qualifying time, you can basically run full time for the Army. You can take like a break of service, and you're still active duty, but you're an athlete. Okay, so that was kind of my goal. And anyway, they thought the running and the idea about PTSD being so off the wall, and the disorganized presentation for that patient I hadn't seen yet, putting those puzzle pieces together, somehow I am bipolar. And so they put me on Abilify again. And I basically conceded. I wasn't going to fight it this time because I was like, there's a secondary gain in the military. Okay, if you get a diagnosis that will give you a medical retirement, you get paid the rest of your life, and you get medical benefits the rest of your life for you and your family.
So there really is a benefit to being able to obtain a diagnosis.
Oh yeah.
Is it all diagnoses or just limited diagnoses?
So they have a rating system. So the more severe it is, the more money you make.
Wow.
Yeah.
Perverse incentives.
Yeah. And so at this point, I'm like, I'll be able to work as a civilian, with my board certification and license, and I'll get a medical retirement.
So this reminds me of something and the challenges I faced in my work. I have seen combat veterans outside of the VA for PTSD treatment.
Yep.
And each person I met was not interested in being able to become what we would call like symptoms in remission. Yeah. Because they thought was going to impact their benefits. So
it would impact their benefits.
Okay.
Yeah. You have to be medically ill to receive disability benefits.
So do you think there's a concern with this, with talking about psychological suffering in terms of illness, like a biological disease? Because we're putting it in the same camp.
Oh, yeah, it's a huge problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. But even the biological disease, when you're talking about pain, I mean, my dad, as an orthopedic surgeon, stopped seeing backs. He wouldn't do surgery on backs. He said it's just...
The outcomes are horrible.
Outcomes are horrible.
Yeah.
But also there's just these secondary gains, to not... And even if it's subconscious, I'm not saying people do this consciously. But, if you can get those narcotics or you can get that disability check, why would you go off of that unless you really want to be healthy? Like, if that's your ultimate goal.
Did you want out at this point? Because you conceded it to that bipolar diagnosis.
I was just going to let it see where it went.
Okay.
Because I thought it was absurd. I was like, you guys could call me a paranoid schizophrenic. I don't care at this point. Like, clearly this relationship has broken down. If you're mocking me because I have an idea that I think can help a lot of people, and you're giving me 3-pagers, that running is a big part of my life, and you're mocking me for my running.
And you're not fitting the profile of being a good soldier for the most part, right?
I don't know. It depends on how you define a good soldier. I mean...
A good soldier complies, follows directives, and acts within the boundaries.
Yeah. Yes and no. A good soldier is physically fit and morally sound and can disobey unethical, illegal orders. But you have to have the mindset to know what those are.
But in reality, what happens when you do that?
They'll crush you. They may even send the FBI after you.
We'll get to that. Okay. Can you take me to the Meadows? I think you were admitted into the Meadows. Explain to my audience how that came about, what was the goal, and what was the treatment.
Yeah, so the Meadows is a facility. Michael Phelps went there. I think he it's a 5-week program that helps people deal with childhood trauma, helps diagnostic uncertainty, helps them get into a rhythm of, if they're addicted to some substance, to basically get off of it.
Did the Army send you there?
Initially, no. I was paying out of pocket to see a civilian psychiatrist because I really didn't trust this psychiatrist at this point. There wasn't really a therapeutic relationship. He put me back in a pillow fight. I couldn't even function, like clicking a mouse. Then he switched me to lithium, knowing that running is a big part of my life, knowing the side effects of lithium could destroy your kidneys. I could be on dialysis for life if I run. That's not going to be...
all for a situation where you're not having hallucinations, delusions. It's not like you're unable to sleep. You're not deteriorating. You're functioning quite well. They're taking a normal behavior like a commitment to running, which millions of Americans commit to as part of their lifestyle, my wife included, who runs marathons.
And it's proven actually to be better than antidepressants.
Well, no doubt, right? And they pathologize that.
Yeah.
Which pretty much explains that anything can be pathologized when that level of authority decides that they want to create mental illness and to pathologize you and to, I think really it's to devalue you.
Dehumanize you.
Dehumanize.
Other you.
Yes.
To make your voice not heard. To destroy any sort of trust.
Which is the power that these psychiatrists have, and it's the power of the psychiatric diagnosis. It really can take away your freedoms.
In many ways, or your family. Your job. It's unbelievable the amount of power that someone can have in a pen.
Yeah.
On a piece of paper.
And that's why I think like medical ethics and sound scientific scrutiny is like so important, and being able to hold professionals accountable, because when you have diagnoses that are based on such subjective interpretations, you really have to be accountable to be able to provide somebody a severe mental illness diagnosis that affects their career, their families, and their freedom. And if you don't have really clear data to support that, and there's a line where that line is crossed into legitimate danger to themselves or somewhere else, if that doesn't happen, then doctors, in my opinion, have to be held accountable. And that's what we see, a complete loss of accountability in the medical authority. You make decisions like that, especially when it comes to mental illness. That person's opinion is going to be held as primary, and all other competing evidence can just be misinterpreted and misconstrued. And I think and discussed in ways that really don't meet the experience of the person who's receiving those diagnoses.
But the Meadows was recommended by a civilian psychiatrist that I paid out of pocket to see, and we shared similar faith. And he's written a couple of books. His name's Kurt Thompson, and he's an MD. And he kind of, as I was waiting for the medical evaluation board to conclude and the physical evaluation board to conclude, whether they were going to discharge me, medically retire me, that sort of thing. I really didn't trust the military at this point for their healthcare. He saw when the military gave me a 50% disability rating, and then 2 months, and said I would have my discharge papers within a month. Okay. 2 months later, they actually said, no, we're going to keep you despite the disability rating, but you're going to be in a non-deployable status. At this point, my marriage had fallen apart. My ex-wife had been diagnosed with depression, was on SSRIs, and basically lost all sex interest and interest in our lives at all. And I had been in a relationship with her for like 18 years at that point, and I don't know, something like that. We've been married for 12, had a child together. It was like everything was crumbling. And that year of waiting, because we had no idea how long it would take, the medical board. It's a lot of paperwork that's done outside Walter Reed, and it's just a waiting process. And so Kurt Thompson was like, hey, oh man, there's so much to this, but I went to an appointment. When the Army decided to keep me, I was going to go AWOL, all right? And I was going to go to New York City, and I was going to transition to be a woman, all right, and just not be found.
Well, what led you
to that?
I think you're missing some.
I'm missing some critical stuff.
Some piece to the story that you would get to that point.
Oh,
because obviously that can be interpreted that maybe you were manic, or there was impaired judgment.
Absolutely. I was in a state of not knowing how to survive. Because the whole prior year, I thought I was going to be medically retired with bipolar disorder. Now they want to keep me, despite the diagnosis, on active duty, basically to be mocked every day for the next 10 years while I pay back my ROTC and medical school time.
So you had another decade to serve.
To serve.
Okay.
It's like a prison sentence. It's like being handed down a prison sentence. And I had been exploring transitioning genders that summer in 2012.
Okay. I just want to make sure that timeline, because we didn't really talk about the Meadows. Is this leading up to the Meadows?
Yeah, it's leading up to the Meadows.
Okay.
Yeah. So my dad, who I didn't have a very good relationship with, but my ex-wife had called him to persuade me to go to this psychiatry appointment with Kurt Thompson. I'm just like, I don't know what to do. Like, I should have just been admitted to the hospital at this point, because I wasn't suicidal, but I was like so beside myself, the fact that the Army wanted to keep me.
So there must have been a lot of hopelessness, I would imagine.
Oh, yeah.
Your marriage is breaking down.
Yep.
You're provided this diagnosis, but you can't leave. And now you have another
trapped.
10 years.
I'm absolutely trapped. And my dad talks me out. I'm at a campsite in Maryland, and my dad's like, you should really see the psychiatrist. And I trusted the psychiatrist, but I'm wearing women's clothes, and I'm about to drive away, to New York City to disappear, because I can't imagine going back to Walter Reed. And my ex-wife called the program director who had seen me seeing the psychiatrist the first time. He talked me, go see the psychiatrist. So I go and see the psychiatrist. And it's the only time at that point in my life that anyone had ever seen me wear women's clothes. It's around, I don't know, August 10th or something, 2012. And he's like, you know what? I know a place that could be really helpful for you called the Meadows. And I've sent patients there before. They've had really good help there. And I'd like to send you there because of diagnostic uncertainty and just sort of figure out what's going on. Because, yeah, I mean, for all intents and purposes, I look desperate. I mean, I think of like a trapped animal in a corner. That is how I looked.
And it's the first time that he sees you dressed in women's clothes.
And he knew about my gender dysphoria and everything. I mean, I'm trying to figure this out. That's partly why I was meeting with him, because I wanted to understand why am I like this, and why I was seeing someone who shared my faith. Because if I saw someone who was gender affirming, I knew I would be on drugs and I'd be on hormones and have surgery, because that's the standard of care. And
yeah,
so I'm trying to, it's ego dystonic behavior is the way that, but in my mind it was.
And there's a cultural shift that's happening at this time around transgenderism.
Yeah, 2012.
Yeah, I mean, it really is in the midst of, for me as a psychologist, where they're talking about gender affirming care, where they're not viewing it from a person who might be struggling or suffering, or it could even be something that people have multiple ways of resolving. Yep. It's being viewed as almost, again, a discrete medical condition. It's who you are. You're slapping an identity on that person with the belief that your only path towards overcoming that suffering is to
be a lifelong patient.
Change your gender.
Yeah.
Like submit to surgery, submit to hormonal changes, and then that would relieve the discomfort.
Yeah.
And that's really being pushed medically during this period of time.
Yep. Yeah, and so and harking back to my reading of Human Sexuality, from 1973, I will lose everything. Like that's even worse than what I'm experiencing now, like going back in the Army. But I was just so confused. I didn't know how to move forward. And so Kurt Thompson, I don't think, did either. And so that's where the Meadows came in. The Army wouldn't pay for me to go, even though they took TRICARE. They wouldn't refer me there because they're like, you're bipolar, and I'm taking lamotrigine, Lamictal at this point. And it was tough because I'm like, well,
did that have any adverse effects?
It didn't.
It didn't.
Fortunately. Yeah. It was like I wasn't taking anything.
Okay.
But there was this fear of Stephen Johnson syndrome, like having scalded skin, it can kill you. So that's a risk. But I was appeasing everyone else, right? Because they wanted to be reassured that I'm on something so that I was safe to be around. That was why I took the medication, to get the approval of
this false sense of security.
Oh, completely false sense
even though these drugs would increase the likelihood there would be some kind of dangerous event, right? It's provides everyone, like, he's medicated. He's under treatment.
Yep.
And it's
some authority is taken over him so that he can be a part of society. And again, this came from, you can recall, a year prior, a PTSD research project proposal, having a poor presentation, and me running a marathon.
Yeah.
Right. So in that period of time, from when I was a fellow to going in the Meadows, my best friend at church had cheated on his wife with a man. Okay, he had same-sex attraction, and he was basically my best friend. And I met him in 2006, and we were going to pray this away together, right? So he got married in January 2007. So as a fellow, I'm dealing with the fallout of the breakdown of his marriage. I mean, he was there when my son was born, like at the hospital. His wife was my wife's best friend. I was encouraged to shun him because of his behavior through this religious community that I was a part of in DC that I'd helped start.
Doesn't sound Christian.
No. And about a year after shunning him, I just couldn't do it anymore because it just felt like such a hypocrite. I'm dealing with my own gender dysphoria, and I'm reading the writing on the wall. I'm like, why would these people not just treat me the same way eventually? Why do I want to be a part of this? And that was all happening in 2012, me re-engaging with him. And, it was like met for coffee. But when I found out that the Army wanted to keep me and I was presenting female at the psychiatric appointment, I actually met with him that weekend in DuPont Circle in D.C. And he was like, "You're beautiful. You look like an Olympic, swimmer," something like this, And he was very kind to me, but it was very confusing to me because I'm like, do I want to go down this path? As I'm waiting for the Army to send me to the Meadows, because they were refusing to allow me to even go. Eventually, my dad paid out of pocket for me to go, and they reimbursed him. And my company commander gave me the convalescent leave to be able to go for the 35 days. But I didn't leave until like October 2nd. So from the beginning of August to October 2nd, I'm living on base at Walter Reed in Bethesda, waiting to go to this appointment. I'm not seeing patients. Waiting to go to the Meadows, And I'm doing a lot of research, again, trying to understand my gender dysphoria. Because, like, the cat's out of the bag. Like, everyone knows I have this problem.
Your family, of course.
Family.
What was the
Army,
response from your parents?
I told my parents in 2006, and my dad's response was, "I hope you don't get kicked out of the Army." My mom's response was, "I don't understand this at all." My in-laws' response was actually like, "Everyone has their own issues, and this is just yours. This is your cross to bear." And I thought it was very gracious of them. So that was 2006 when I came out to them. This is 2012. And I'm just waiting to go to the Meadows. And I discovered this term, autogynephilia, AGP. Are you familiar with this?
Tell me about it.
Okay, it's where the transgender community hates this term because it creates gender dysphoria to be a paraphilia. Okay, autogynephilia is essentially getting turned on by the thought of yourself being a woman.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Traditionally, that was transvestites, right? Transgenderism was viewed from that perspective, a sexual fetish, and that was in the DSM.
Yeah, yep, exactly. With or without autogynephilia, or
right.
with transvestic fetishism.
Yeah.
So I told you that story, like growing up before puberty, so I'm thinking I'm a true transsexual, but then after that, I would masturbate to the idea of being a woman, particularly a bride, not just any woman, and in a religious context. I mean, it was
so that's what was sexually exciting to you.
That was what was sexually exciting to me. And so I'm like, this is it. There's a thing that I have a diagnosis. This is the diagnosis. And I was so excited to share it with now my ex-wife and the priest. Not the psychology priest, but a different one, that I've discovered the term that describes the experience that I'm having.
So can I ask you, why is that so controversial in those circles?
I don't know. I think because I'll guess, the transgender community wants to be normalized. Like the gay community.
Does it delegitimize it?
In a lot of people's eyes, they would just say, you're just a pervert. You might as well be a pedophile.
But it's not. I mean, it's not the same as being.
It's not
pedophile.
even close. It's not even close. But the mockery, that these trans-exclusive radical feminists, TERFs as the term that a lot of the transgender community describes people like J.K. Rowling. It's paraphilias are bad.
So do you think this has led to the rise in trying to normalize transgenderism?
Mm-hmm.
And do you believe that's had an impact on vulnerable youth?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. No, and I'm deeply disappointed in the trajectory of the transgender community over the last decade. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to talk about it right now, but I want to get to the Meadows. But that really excited me that I understood what was going on. And I had a meeting with this priest and my now ex-wife, and they said, if you cross-dress again, we're going to excommunicate you from the church and encourage divorce. This is September 10th, 2012. And I've been waiting for a month to go to the Meadows. Like, I'm trying to get help, guys. Like, I'm literally just waiting in paperwork. And they didn't want to hear anything about the autogynephilia, that I was like, oh, I actually have a diagnosis now that it's explained, what's going on in my head, why I'm had shame for so long, and so then I'm on my way back to Walter Reed in Bethesda, and I'm thinking, they didn't listen to me at all, like they just wanted to unload, these are the punishments. They didn't really want me to heal. They just wanted me to white knuckle something that I've been dealing with since childhood. And I wrote an email to the psychology priest, that priest who's at the appointment, and my ex-wife. And I'm like, please don't talk to me or come near me while I'm waiting to get help. I'm afraid I will physically harm you if in your presence, because I did not feel heard at all. This is not a threat. And I signed it with deep love and gratitude. She took that email to get a protective order. And next thing I know, I'm in a courtroom, and of course she was awarded the protective order. This guy's got bipolar disorder. He's transgender. The Army just took him through a medical board. He's waiting to go to a rehab facility for 5 weeks.
Definition of unstable.
Unstable. Absolutely. And so the protective order awarded gave my wife $6,600 a month of my $7,700 a month paycheck for a year. It was unbelievable. And no child care plan. We have a son, who I didn't even say goodbye to. Nothing. It was like so brutal. And my ex-wife's attorney actually argued for the payout to her to go up because we had committed to like $900 a month to the church. And the priest was literally there testifying against me in court. He took out the lines saying, I'm afraid I'm going to physically harm you, and put it in a Word document and said, look at these things that he said. And I'm like, defending, I signed it with deep love and gratitude, and I don't want to be in your presence. I'm trying to get help. I'm trying to go to the Meadows. So after that all happened, the Army kind of bent, and they said, fine, you can go. So I ended up there beginning of October, a 5-week program. They talk about childhood trauma. When I talked about my childhood, they're like, why don't you just transition? And I was like, because I'll lose my job, I'll lose my spouse, I'll lose my entire social network. I can't do that. Well, fine, we'll look at it as like a sex addiction, in this autogynephilia framework. The thing is, like, I don't need anything to masturbate. Like, I don't need any article of clothing. I don't need, it's just all in my head.
But what's the definition of sex addiction? What makes it an addiction?
I have no idea. That you need more and more of it, and you don't get as much of an effect. So,
is that occurring? Like, is the behavior becoming more and more risky and putting yourself at jeopardy?
No.
Okay.
None of that.
Yeah. So it's just another label that doesn't fully fit your experience.
Yep. But I was desperate. I was desperate for help, minus getting surgery, going on hormones, and becoming a social outcast, as a open transgender woman. And so I went to 12-step meetings for 2 years, leading the meetings,
As a sex addict?
As a sex addict, yep. And
it seems like you're adopting multiple identities based on the professional.
Whatever sticks.
Right? First it's bipolar.
Yep.
Now it's a sex addiction.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And after my divorce was finalized, this is like in August of 2014. All right, I had to go to court to get joint custody of my son. The psychiatrist testified for me that I'm a safe, stable, bipolar, patient. He's going to 12-step meetings. The cross-dressing stuff isn't in the picture. And so I got joint custody of my son. But when the divorce was finalized, which I was still holding out hope that we would be able to reconcile, one of the gay members in the 12-step meeting was like, you're not a sex addict. Like, you've had one sex partner and you're not into porn. Why are you here? Like, I have so many transgender friends. Why don't you just go get help? was like, I guess you're right. So I went to this clinic in DC called Whitman Walker, and they prescribed me hormones, and they helped me change my name and gender legally. And they basically, I got connected with hundreds, if not thousands, of transgender people in the military, literally like overnight. And
So now you're healed.
I'm healed. Yeah, the shame is gone. There's no more shame.
So that's removed.
That's removed, which, there's freedom in that.
What's the other side, though?
The other side is that I was going to be a patient for life, and it didn't really address my underlying trauma that I've experienced, both from my bicycle crash, these broken relationships, with my wife.
Your life fundamentally changes through your exposure to the psychiatric system.
Mm-hmm.
So you go from what seems to be a high functioning physician athlete,
Yep.
With a stable marriage,
Yep.
but has this paraphilia.
Yeah.
Is that the right word?
Yeah, I think so.
Probably to describe it, right? And then it evolves into bipolar disorder, medicated, family falls apart,
Yep.
and transitioning.
Yep.
I mean, that's a pretty dramatic shift.
Yeah, it took 2008 till 2014.
Okay, I am interested in what happens psychologically when you do undergo that transition. So you did take hormones,
I did.
and then you transitioned to a female. I want to know, does your quality of your life improve from making that shift?
I was in a psych ward within a month for like 3 or 4 days. Yeah.
So no.
So, no. No. I had so much fears as far as coming out that I was doing this with my family, that I was actually transitioning, and with my job, because I knew it was not allowed in the military. But the military was kind of in a bind because they were already keeping me with the bipolar diagnosis. So, and it was an Obama, administration. And so kicking someone out with gender dysphoria, I was like the poster child test case for someone serving with gender dysphoria in the military.
Yeah, you were.
And so there were people who were really rooting for me to succeed. The psychologists that I was seeing at Walter Reed, the psychiatrists that I was seeing at Walter Reed, they were cheering me on with the transition. And psychologically, I felt great. I was connected to this LGBT community in DC, and invited to all the parties. And like, it was amazing. I was dancing all the time.
And you're loved.
Loved.
Right? So you
Included,
move from
belonged.
Yeah, you move from an environment of judgment,
Yep.
of being slapped with a mental illness diagnosis,
Yep.
to now you're being celebrated.
Yeah. No, and in the midst of that, I meet my wife at Walter Reed. She's a Red Cross volunteer waiting to start an anesthesia residency. And we had mutual friends. I had a coworker who knew her family through work outside of the military. And the coworker was an immigrant from Egypt and Orthodox Christian. She was the first person at work that was like, "Are you transitioning genders?" This is like in December 2014. And I'm like, "I am." And she's like, "Look, I've talked to my priest about this, and like, I don't see any problem with it at all. Like, it's just part of who you are, And this is from an Orthodox Christian woman from Egypt. And another woman from work who was a Christian who had converted to Islam, Caucasian woman, married an Ethiopian man who was Muslim. We became like best friends through our care of wounded warriors and music therapy and art therapy and dance therapy. This was before my transition. She was like so supportive of me, and helped kind of me navigate the legal, administrative aspects of all of this. So psychologically, I couldn't have been happier, other than that admission. And the admission was because I stopped the progesterone. I essentially had PMS. Like, it was like a person in a male body experiencing PMS for the first time without having a network of other people who are experiencing it with you and can tell you it's going to be okay. And the fear of coming out to my parents and my job. So like while I was in the psych ward, I wrote a coming out letter to my parents that I was actually transitioning. And I don't know, when I met my wife, she didn't care about my gender at all. What was bizarre to me, you know, and I think she would have said at the time that she was bisexual, and she witnessed how I cared for patients in the hospital, and taking time to listen to them. I treated all comers. I would take the worst cases, you know, people that were like a ticking time bomb, so angry at the medical establishment, and I would be happy to see them, you know, and I felt like I was like diffusing bombs, you know, of people that were so angry, because I would allow them to vent their anger and not be defensive.
Yeah. The power of being listened to, right? The power of trying to be, of being understood, and the power of human connection.
Yep. Yep. No, and so that's why I practice medicine, and my wife witnessed that and fell in love with me. And I thought she was very attractive too. I, over that period of time on hormones, didn't know where I would end up, with men or with women. I went on some dates with some men, some dates with women, and you know, I didn't really know where I would land. But my wife and I got pretty serious pretty quickly, and she met my family like in Florida mid-May of 2015. We met in March, and I met her family because they were local in Maryland, and she seemed to fit in really well and with my family, despite being from the Soviet Union.
Oh, she's from the Soviet Union.
She's from the Soviet Union, yeah. And came to the United States via Italy. She lived there for 2 years after the Soviet Union collapsed, and then came to the United States when she was 10 years old. And yeah, it was like a love for life, like animals, kids, nature, all of these things, and had religious beliefs that weren't judgmental and constricting, suffocating, similar to the Egyptian woman. It was like seeing religion in a different way than even Episcopalian. Episcopalian more celebrates the LGBT. You know, they'll have the flag, you know, in their the front yard of their church. Orthodox weren't like that. They're like, God is mysterious, you know, and like we're all on our own journey to try to understand God, and that's okay, you know. And as long as you're on a journey to know God better, you're welcome here. You don't have to take a political stand.
So just again, open, loving, respectful.
It was incredible.
Like almost professing some of the teachings of Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Yep. Right, yeah. So I was blown away. And we got engaged on June 26th, 2015, the day of the Obergefell decision about same-sex marriage being allowed in the United States across the land. And we got engaged the same day. And part of that engagement was that I would go off hormones. You know, not with the intention that I would never go back on hormones, because I felt good on them other than that period of time, the first month. I liked the changes in my body. I felt that I looked attractive. A lot of the pictures in the media are after I've been off hormones for a year or two. But I was celebrated, you know, and I was in the media with BuzzFeed and MSNBC, some other networks, and I don't know, it just...
First known openly transgender active duty officer in the United States.
Yeah, so I was able to get my gender marker changed in DEERS, the system that we use in the military, using a court order from D.C. that changed my gender and my name. And so that all happened very quickly. We got married in September 25th of 2015. So we met in March, engaged in June, married in September, and we'll be celebrating 10 years soon.
And so you get off hormones upon being married?
Being engaged.
Being engaged.
Because we want to have kids.
Okay.
There's a biological reality.
Yes. And do you then transition back to being male?
Not yet.
Okay.
No.
And what's that like for you, where you're not on hormones, but you're presenting as Jamie?
Awful. It was awful, because I was sort of caught in this conundrum where there were a lot more male attributes, of just my physical body. My testosterone shot up, and I didn't feel good at all. But I was doing it because I wanted to have children with my wife. I didn't like how I looked in the mirror, and I didn't like how I felt. It wasn't until the summer of 2016 where Anna's like, I wonder what you would look like in male clothes. So a year later, after I stopped hormones. So we went to Starbucks together, Barnes & Noble, and I'm wearing some clothes that I had in a trash bag. And I'm like holding her hand, and I'm kissing her in public. And she was living in Pittsburgh at the time, but we were in Maryland when that happened. And I would take my son on the weekends I had him up to Pittsburgh. And I presented mail after that, and I'm rolling in the grass with him and like just playing, and my wife was like, you're a lot more affectionate in public and more playful with your son when you present mail, and this was in the summer of 2016. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. And then the ban got lifted around that time, and I had made the choice, and I regret it now, in the fall of 2016, to continue to be basically a political activist, in the Army. I regret that because I think I was in a place where I could have been comfortable presenting male, in the fall of 2016, because of just the different ways that I had been
But in that
experiencing.
type of political climate, what are the ramifications of detransitioning?
I had no idea. I'd lose my job. Yeah, and then all of this media stuff that I was in 2015, well, were you honest? I'm like, and I'm like, yeah, I was at the time. I mean, 100%, speaking from the heart and from my experience.
Yeah. I'm trying to imagine the degree of identity confusion that creates, but also fear, because you're celebrated as an activist.
Yeah.
You're a national figure.
Yep.
And you're being supported by a large community.
Yep.
So
this is what's wild. So I had stopped hormones in June of 2015. I stopped the Lamictal in December of 2015. So I had persuaded the psychiatric establishment that I wasn't bipolar at all. I never had it. It was all gender dysphoria the whole time.
Mm.
And they accepted it.
Yeah.
And I was like, so now I can be deployable, right? I can get back to being a soldier again.
Now it fits in their ideology.
It does.
Right? Because you see these psychiatric diagnoses, they become in vogue at different periods of our culture, right?
Yep.
And now gender dysphoria is in vogue.
Yep.
And now that discredits bipolar disorder. You were just suffering.
And you can have both. You can have bipolar disorder and gender dysphoria. But I was, again, using the DSM and being like, I never really met criteria for bipolar disorder back in 2012.
And you have a lot more credibility now as a transgender activist.
Oh yeah.
Right? Like people would fear you.
Because I have connections in the media and politicians, who
everyone,
invite me to parties.
Everyone's afraid of being transphobic. You're afraid of being racist because that's how we deal with these issues in our culture.
Yep. When in fact, I'm just developing a new identity as a husband and as a father.
Yeah.
And finding joy in holding my wife's hand in public and rolling in the grass with my son and realizing, you know what? I don't have to do this. I don't have to be a patient the rest of my life. If I can find joy in those moments, why do I need to take medication and have surgery that's going to sterilize me the rest of my life and literally make me a patient the rest of my life?
Watch out. You're starting to think independently.
Yeah. So then Trump gets elected, right, in 2016. And then his famous, tweet of kicking out all transgender members, it was in July of 2017. And everyone's like, what are you going to do? And I'm still in this political activist sort of like grasping for some relevancy when I have a son who was just born in June of 2017 with a lot of potential medical issues. My wife's on maternity leave, and it's like, I can't do anything with the media. I have got to focus on my wife and my son. And so I didn't take any interviews after that tweet. And I was angry about the whole situation, but at the same time, like I was like, here's even more reason for me to fight to be deployable, right? So this is, if you're active duty, you want to be deployable. If you're deployable means you can go anywhere in the world into an austere environment. And then for me as a doctor, provide medical care in an austere environment. I'm not on medication, so they can't use that against me. And I no longer have the bipolar diagnosis, so they can't use that against me. So I volunteered for a deployment to Mosul, Iraq after that tweet. That was my rebellion. And I went and trained with this unit, Fort Irwin in California in February of 2018.
Presenting as male.
Female.
As female.
Yeah. So I present female at work. It's honestly, it's gender neutral. Like you're in the military, you're wearing camouflage, but I would wear makeup and I grew my hair out, and man, so many things I regret. But I find out, I ran the Boston Marathon, okay, in 2018 as a woman, okay, and it was in this women's running magazine. There were people that had fully transitioned. It was like the first year that the Boston Marathon approved transgender women to run.
What do you think about that now?
I regret it, 100%. It's not that I didn't have the times to run it as a male either. I mean, it's just
it's unfair.
It's unfair. It's unfair on many levels.
Yeah,
and I regret it deeply, that I did it in 2018. But the Sunday before the race is always on a Monday. I find out that they didn't approve me to deploy because there are no transgender support groups in Iraq. So I had been attending this transgender support group, helping, like run the group, but it would go in my medical record that I was attending these meetings. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. You're not going to let me deploy because there's not a transgender support group in Mosul?
The fragilization of people always shocks me, right? Like the only way you could be okay is if you had a support group present. Like you could not cope in any other way.
Yeah. Yep. So I'd been off medications at that point for 2.5 years. We're not going to deploy you. And so instead they sent me to Fort Bragg. And right before I went to Fort Bragg, I was invited to speak at the Pentagon for Pride in June of 2018 on courage. And so I accepted the invitation and I gave a presentation. And my presentation was, it's online, you can watch it, was that being a transgender doctor in the military is a lot like, and I used a quote from an existentialist philosopher from France, Simone Weil, W-E-I-L. It's a lot like being a butterfly trapped in a collection, pinned down, but still alive, and wanting to love. Because I still had this calling, I thought, to be a doctor in an austere environment. I still saw people, wounded warriors, from Iraq and Afghanistan. We hadn't pulled out yet. And I loved my son. I still loved my ex-wife. I had conflicted feelings about that divorce, when it ended. And now I have a new wife that I love deeply, and I have a new son, and I just felt so trapped in this political environment. And so I talked about suicide prevention, and I talked about, how to, the question is why should we live, and I ended up, towards the end being like, I need to find someone who knows more than me that can train me to live a meaningful life, and for me right now, that's Jesus Christ, and I say this at Pride at the Pentagon, dressed as a woman, by the way. So I got sent to Fort Bragg later that summer without my family. They couldn't come. And I drove back and forth between Fort Bragg and Rockville, Maryland for 4 years, every week, 338 miles. I would leave Monday morning, 2:30 in the morning, to get to work by 7:30. And I would leave at 4:30 in the afternoon on Friday to get home at 9:30 to pick up my son from his mom so that we could spend a weekend together. And I listened to over 130 books. I listened to a lot of podcasts, 10 hours a week in the car. One of them was Carl Jung's autobiography. And that actually is what helped me the most dealing with gender dysphoria.
Actually reading that right now.
No way.
Yeah.
That's incredible. So his discussion about anima and animus, and I was like, you know what? There's nothing wrong with me. I can have anima and animus. I don't need to be afraid of it anymore. And on top of that, my wife would tell people, Jamie is the most masculine and feminine person I know. And I'm like, what greater compliment than that? I'm an integrated person. I can be a compassionate, dance-filled person who can also want to go to war and protect my family and my country.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with either of those things.
So these identity markers, these labels, you think they ultimately harm our society?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
I mean, this is a cautionary tale for so many. I'm curious to know, if you could go back and do it all over again, right? And let's say you could choose how the environment responded to you, your family, your culture, your military, your country. What do you think you needed, and how would it have changed the trajectory?
I mean, I needed a safe place where I knew I wouldn't be ostracized to express what I was dealing with, free of shame and judgment. I mean, I think it's where we all want. That's what we want when we see a psychologist or we see a psychiatrist or we see our primary care doctor. Those are so rare to find. And even within my family unit, I was afraid because of the religious upbringing that I had that I would be rejected. And oddly enough, I was rejected by my in-laws, but I wasn't by my biological family. My dad is my best friend right now. When he retired from orthopedics, he got a seminary degree, and his last paper was on transgenderism in the evangelical church. He's read more about it than I have. I mean, probably 30 books. Still reads them today, even though I've detransitioned. It's still a topic of interest to him to understand me because he loves me. And like that, knowing that I'm a beloved son was the gateway to heal everything else. To be rooted and established in love by your own biological father, but also, in my estimation, my creator. That is where healing really happened for me. And then having a healthy marriage that could withstand a storm of the federal government, and to have these beautiful boys that we brought into the world, and to see the joy in them as we jump on the trampoline doing our affirmations before school. We do these affirmations, and the first one is, I am loved. We do it on trampoline holding hands, and we do probably 30 different ones. And we do you are loved, and we do we are loved.
Are you comfortable in your body as James at this stage in your life?
Yeah, there's some residual. I mean, I'd say like 99%. There are times when I'm not in a good place, with my current wife, especially, where I'm just like, I want to escape, or with the federal government, I had to work through that, like the escape for me was becoming a woman.
So you think there's a part of like a coping mechanism there about
absolutely.
Not dealing with your reality?
Correct. Absolutely. So for me, it was a pose. It was a very elaborate pose.
Yeah, I mean, it speaks to the complicated nature of all this. Yeah. And, what we've done in our culture to try to put people into categories and develop identity markers often is just does a disservice to them and doesn't speak to the complexity of this. And I just think about young developing adolescents right now and the push to prevent puberty or to transition before you can even consent, and how evil that is because of the implications. I mean, it's really an anti-human perspective.
Yeah, no, it is. And like, I have met so many wonderful transgender people, and so many wonderful people in the LGBT community. But I will say not one stood with me during the hardest time of my life, in 2012 or 2022, when I was federally indicted.
What happened there? And this is, I'm looking at time here for both of us. So, and I know could be some pending litigation, and I don't want this to be the central focus of our podcast and actually what the message is, but this gets a lot more complicated, doesn't it?
It does. The stakes get higher. Yeah.
What happened? 2022.
Yeah, my wife and I were federally indicted for supposedly, allegedly wanting to maliciously harm the United States using private health information.
What does that mean?
I don't know. It was a theory by a prosecutor in Baltimore who somehow got an email my wife sent from her Johns Hopkins work account to the Russian embassy saying we are for life and we don't want to cut Russia off from the international community. When she said we, she meant me and my husband. The same day that she wrote that email on March 1st, 2022, I wrote to Doctors Without Borders. My 10-year prison sentence was ending, I knew, in August of 2022. And I had lined up a job to work in the emergency room at Johns Hopkins. Doctors Without Borders is a very appealing organization for us to use our skills to help in an environment where everyone's running away. And so for 6 months, the FBI spied on us, found nothing negative, and then created a sting operation where they pretended to be the Russian intelligence to try to extract medical records from us. And the next thing you know in the news is there's a federal indictment, 2 doctors in Baltimore wanting to maliciously harm the United States, sharing private medical records with Russia. It was, oh, and by the way, the first transgender Army officer is one of the doctors. And despite everything I've been through, I love the United States. I love our Bill of Rights. I love that we have checks and balances. I would not be a free man if there were no checks and balances in a Bill of Rights. And I'm proud of the care that I gave thousands of combat veterans at Walter Reed.
So what is the evidence they had against you?
They photographed some of my handwritten notes that I had done years before at Fort Bragg, because I had already left Fort Bragg in July. The sting was in August. I had nothing on me. They were extracting these records with threatening our family, threatening Anna's family in Russia, threatening our children. My marriage was threatened by this entire situation of Russian intelligence trying to get us.
Was there concern that you were a Russian asset or your wife was a Russian asset?
Yeah, that's what the federal government thought about both of us, despite spying on us for 6 months and having no evidence of that. They created this environment where we felt threatened and coerced for them to take photographs of frivolous records of no one of importance. They couldn't even identify them without the Army's help because I used a DOD ID number, not a Social Security number, not a birthday. It was a DOD ID number. And I knew that when they took the photo, that they would not be able to find these people. But of course, it was the FBI and it was Army counterintelligence. And because my wife saw the camera that the undercover agent had on the very first visit, she was afraid that this was not someone from the Russian embassy. This was FSB, and this is dangerous.
Yeah.
So it was completely coerced.
Did you and your wife still have relationships back in her homeland? And
she has 3 living grandparents in Russia, and she has a great aunt in Ukraine, in Mariupol. She has family on both sides. She's been helping Ukraine for 2 years. Her best friend at work was a Ukrainian doctor at Johns Hopkins that she helped for 2 years. Like for her, it's a civil war.
So do you think this was paranoia on the side of the United States government?
I don't know. We'll find out.
Yeah. So where do things stand now?
Yeah, we've retained an attorney to hopefully find out answers. What beyond what's publicly known as far as the constitutional rights that were violated and the acts of Congress that were violated by the DOJ that led to the dismissal of the case with prejudice. We believe that there are other constitutional rights that were also violated and likely other laws that were violated to create the sting operation and target us.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, your story, where there's violation of U.S. citizens' rights by the U.S. federal government is becoming very public news right now, and a lot of major podcasts where people are talking about where their own rights were violated, set up stings to try to garner information against U.S. citizens that were somehow identified as a threat to the establishment.
There is no way these medical records could be used to harm the United States. And
that doesn't make sense.
It doesn't even make sense. The federal indictment didn't even make sense, like on its face.
Do you think there's more to this?
Absolutely.
What are we missing here? What am I missing?
Yeah. So during the pandemic, I violated the 50-mile radius from Fort Bragg. So the General Carrillo, who's currently the CENTCOM commander, restricted everyone to 50 miles within Fort Bragg unless you lived in Raleigh. Then you could You could drive to a populated city in Raleigh and spread the virus. But if your family lived in Rockville, you couldn't.
Why Raleigh?
Because a lot of people live in Raleigh and work at Fort Bragg, even though it's like an hour commute.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, I had already been driving back and forth for 2 years. And, you know, I had joint custody of my son. I was supposed to have him for spring break in March of 2020. And my ex-wife said, if you come up and try to get him, I'm going to report you to the Army that you're driving back and forth. And I was like, go right ahead. They need doctors. And so I drove up to Maryland, as I did every weekend for 4 years. And she reported me to the Inspector General at Fort Bragg that I was a national security threat because I'm driving up to have my son for his spring break. So I don't know if that's what opened it up. I also reported 2 patient deaths at Fort Bragg that happened because of neglectful behavior. We pretended like we had a dialysis machine and we didn't, and a patient died. And then there was a bad handoff from a patient in the ER to an interventional cardiologist. And they didn't tell them that this patient had gotten 2 liters of IV fluids and basically suffocated on these fluids in the interventional radiology suite. Complete neglect, malpractice. And I was part of the quality service division at the point, and no one in the hospital was doing anything about either of these, holding anyone accountable. So I reported it to the Joint Commission. And I don't know if that, as a whistleblower, 2021 led to this, or was it just the email that my wife sent to the Russian embassy? I don't think it was, because why follow someone for 6 months, find nothing negative, and then gun 2 doctors, you know, to get them convicted? It just makes no sense. My wife's an obstetric anesthesiologist. She hasn't done an epidural in 3 years. I was relieving ER doctors from having to care for people boarding in the emergency room. That was my job as an internist. Those are 2 really useful things in society to relieve human suffering. Why play pretend like we're Russian spies? It was bizarre. There has to be more to it.
Yeah, this must be surreal for you. Are you scared?
I'm not right now. I mean, there's so many other things going on in the world to be afraid of. I mean, with the Middle East and nukes from Russia and whatever else. I mean, there's a lot of other existential things that to be afraid of than the human dynamics and what's going on in the United States. I don't know.
Yeah, but I mean, treason, right? Ultimately, is this treacherous, and like, where can the U.S. government take this?
It's dismissed with prejudice, and they can't appeal it.
They cannot appeal it.
They put in their notice that they were going to appeal the judge's decision dismissing it because they violated the Classified Information Procedures Act and the Speedy Trial Act, but they withdrew their appeal 3 months later, and so it's done.
It is done.
Yeah, on their end, going after us.
Got it. Okay.
It's not done on our end, going after them.
Understood.
So,
okay.
yeah.
That makes more sense why you wouldn't be scared.
Yeah. So, I mean, is the FBI, am I on some list somewhere? Almost certainly. You know, would I like to get off that list? Absolutely. I mean, I served our country for 2 decades. I'm not a threat to anyone. I'm the opposite of a threat. My grandfather served in World War II. My grandfather served in World War I. I think I deserve to be treated like any other American.
Yeah.
Despite marrying a woman who was a naturalized citizen. We have 2 kids together. So,
yeah, I want to reflect a little bit on this episode, which of course is your life, and I'm deeply appreciate your willingness to be vulnerable and share a lot of these details. I guess what are some of the takeaways from you now as a medical professional who works in this culture and understands the unique challenges that the LGBT community faces, how it intersects also with conservative America? What ultimately is the most compassionate and ethical way to be able to respond to people who are suffering and just struggling with their gender identity?
I think a big part of it is patience with a C. In that, research has shown a lot of these kids that struggle with their identity, you know, and they don't, like 90% or something, the Swedish studies, like it's once they grow up and they get through puberty. You know, I struggled through my puberty. You know, I struggled as an adult, you know, but it took learning new things and having new experiences to heal some of that deep pain that I experienced as a kid. There's scars, and scars, in my opinion, just show that you've lived, and they can be beautiful, and there's nothing wrong with having scars. But these big gaping wounds, there are predatory people out there that can make those wounds worse and fester and go gangrene. And you want to have the wisdom to know who the predators are from who is not a predator, and knowing that it's just really hard to trust right now. It's really hard to trust after the pandemic. Yeah. And that politics is not getting so intertwined with healthcare that it's hard to know what's true and what's not, and what's helpful and what's not helpful. And so patience, I think, is the key for all of this, because I think we will find a way forward. Not today, but 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road. So.
Yeah, a lot of this is common sense in so many ways. I started a nonprofit that really focuses on informed consent and medical freedom. And the further we deviate from giving a person time and having acceptance for the struggle that they are going through, and having patience and love and compassion for that person, the further we get away from that and we rush to pathologize, medicalize, and drug, the sicker we become as a society. And so much about your story could have been alleviated. The problems that you actually had to face would have been alleviated with time and understanding and some support.
And humility.
Humility. Listen,
on both sides.
On both sides,
Yep.
Mistakes are made. And what happens when you start interacting with medical professionals and you feel like that person is your enemy? Yep. Well, then it's just human nature to become defensive and protect yourself. Yep. And it just sets up a dynamic between a professional and a patient, which is antithetical to what a healer should be, yep. right? And somehow we have devolved into that as society, where we are setting up a relationship between healers and patients that is divisive. And that's a direct consequences of the assembly line healthcare that exists, 10-minute appointments, quick diagnoses.
It's impossible to create an intimate doctor-patient relationship in that environment.
And we've become disconnected from nature. We've become disconnected from each other. And there's a lot of what you shared today, which was wisdom about love and the importance of caring for each other and hearing each other and understanding each other without the labels, without the diagnoses, without the divisiveness. And ultimately, here you are, and you can be open. Yes, struggles exist, but I'm also understand myself better, right? You understand yourself as when things become challenging and stressful, that you have an urge or a desire to want to escape that mm-hmm. reality. And mm-hmm. there's a way in which that's done. But this is also rooted into a very young age, that when you wanted to experience things that were natural to you, including dance and art, that feminine side of you was judged. Mm-hmm. And so a deep-rooted shame becomes, I think, a core of all these aspects of the self that lead you to hate yourself. Yep. And these things are so important for good therapists to understand that, unfortunately, I feel like the education system for many therapists is pseudo-indoctrination. Mm-hmm. And we need to get back to some of these core mechanisms of what does it means to be a healer.
Same in medical school.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same.
Well, Dr. James Henry, I really do feel grateful that you drove out here and you had the willingness to tell your story. It most certainly was a radically genuine conversation.
It was an honor. Thank you.